Hello everyone, this is Ethan McMahon of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome to our webinar about what the government can do to help developers use federal data. I'll provide some short introductions and describe the format for today, and then we'll get going. We have a set of stellar speakers today. Alex Howard of O'Reilly Media will be the moderator. Jeremy Carbaugh of the Sunlight Foundation will present, as will Michaela Hackner and Kurt Volker of Forum 1. And Forum 1, in case you didn't know, was the winner of the Apps for America 2 contest with their app called Data Masher. During the presentations, all of your phone lines will be muted. So if you have any questions, please type them into the GoToMeeting panel at the bottom right of your right panel there, or click on the Raise My Hand icon. And at the end of the presentation, we'll unmute phone lines and take your questions so everyone can hear them. If you have technical issues with the webinar, please let us know right away. You can just type it into that same little panel. So next slide, please. Just one more shameless plug about what EPA is doing in this area. Here's a little background about EPA's Apps for the Environment Challenge. This is a challenge we started on June 9th, and it challenges software developers to make apps that use EPA's data to make environmental or human health related apps. And there are very few restrictions. They just have to use EPA's data and address one of Lisa Jackson's 7 priorities, which are very broad, related to the environment and human health. They'll be judged based on their usefulness, their innovativeness, and their usability, and submissions are due by September 16th. Winners and runners-up will be awarded for Best Overall App and Best Student App, and we'll also have a People's Choice Award, which is based on popular voting. We'll have a big recognition event in Washington in early November. The date is actually November 8th, and you can always get more details at our website, epa.gov/apps for the environment. Now I'll turn it over to Alex, and we can get underway.
Hello, everybody. Alex Howard from O'Reilly Media. A couple housekeeping bits. If you're following online, we have an active back channel hashtag at #PoundGreenApps on Twitter. You can get to that by twitter.com/search. And of course, we can see you all hanging out in the chat room. So thanks again for joining us. I want to really move quickly into some context for this today beyond what we just heard about. The first is that this isn't necessarily something that's brand new. Government has been trying to develop innovation and collaborate with citizens and industry for centuries. One of the best examples of that is actually the Longitude Prize. If you think back to the history of navigation, government had to find some way to get people to be able to get across the oceans. The government of England stimulated innovation in that area. And was able to get a solution to that. And if you're interested in that, Google the Longitude Prize and you'll hear a bit more. More recently, the X Prize has been stimulating development in the private sector. And what's interesting to watch here, and you can see on that webinar here a picture of a plane that successfully made it into orbit, and we're seeing more happen in that space now that NASA's backed a bit above manned spaceflight, is that some different things have happened just in the past several years which has accelerated this movement. People often refer back to Apps for Democracy in Washington, D.C., which was founded under the nation's first CIO, Vivek Kundra, where he tried to take the open data that the District of Columbia had and make something useful of it. And in this case, he opened it up to citizens and developers, including some folks here in Washington from the Sunlight Foundation. We're joined here by one of the Sunlight Foundation members. And then after that, that model's been taken around the world, and we're seeing apps contests at the national, state, city level, you name it. And then at the beginning of this year, the President signed something called the America Competes Act, which had been hanging out in Congress for a long time. And one of the details in there was that it allowed the rest of federal agencies to start hosting these challenges or contests in the same way that NASA and DARPA had. So DARPA's had a lot of success. NASA's had some success too in getting results from sharing a design or a need and then asking people to be innovative around it. And so essentially what's happened is Congress said, okay, well, let's try this for other places. And now we're starting to see that happen. Now, there are some issues around this, and after we've been doing this for a couple of years, we're starting to see some of them. One of the first is that people are generally measuring the success of these things from apps that result from them. There are some other things that come out of these contests, specifically around figuring out whether the data is any good or not, whether the data needs to be presented in better structure, whether there are other issues about it being clean, etc. A lot of times when data has been exposed, people have made cool apps with it, but they haven't done things for government or citizens. There's starting to be some more interest in that. There's a sustainability issue. Do these apps exist after the contests or not? And now we're starting to see really evidenced in the example from New York most recently, where are trying to tie together the ideas that people have for ways to make government work better, so needs that citizens have or government agencies have that people can actually hack on. So if we're looking for the key issues for open government data, and this is what we're looking at the developers in the call for in part, really, they really want you to tell them what's wrong. That there's progress if you look at the surveys, the research that's been done, but that for many developers are finding that a lot of the data they need isn't available yet, and that a lot of it isn't usable. And so specifically, there's issues with the timeliness of the data, accuracy, whether it's presented in a usable and open format, whether it's got metadata, whether it's consistent, and then whether it's simply complete. So if you go onto data.gov and look at these data sets and find these issues, report them back so that they can try to make them better. So with that, that's your big overview, and now I'm going to pass on to Mr. Jay Carba, Jeremy, and he works at Sunlight Labs, and he can talk more to what they do.
Yeah, thanks. So as Alex said, I'm Jeremy Carba. I work at Sunlight Labs. On the screen here, you can see a bunch of screenshots from challenge.gov. This is only about 65% of the challenges that are on challenge.gov right now. It was 111 the last time I checked. So clearly, if you add these to all of the challenges that are done by local governments, nonprofits, and other private entities, it's clearly a crowded space. And the idea of challenges isn't really that novel or unique anymore. So the question becomes, if you're holding a challenge now, why even have a challenge? And there's a bunch of great reasons to do so. The first is that the data that you can provide gains more value when people do interesting things with it. Just publishing the data is a good start, but it doesn't become practically useful for someone until it's packaged in a way or used to create a service or app that has some impact on their daily life. In addition to that, there can be multiple ways that the public can improve the data that an agency might not be able to. Some use might be outside of the mission, or there could be other data sets that someone, a citizen, can mash up with the data that the agency couldn't. Along with that, it provides a great opportunity for a community to organize around a particular interest that is core to the mission of the agency. And then finally, it's a great way to get citizens involved in the public interest. The government can often be this nebulous other entity that sits out there. But if you can get people actively involved in working with the government to create great things, it creates a great personal connection. And it really helps people feel that they've contributed to society, which can be a very rewarding thing. The key thing to remember about contests is that they're not a way to get free software development. Developers can see that when that happens, and it is not something that makes you want to take part in the challenge. Vivek Kundra did great work as the DC CTO, but one of the issues that I had with his Apps for Democracy challenge was he made an argument for it based on the ROI that the city got out of these apps being developed. And not only do I think that's just the wrong reason to set for having these competitions, but it's also a questionable metric to gauge. So clearly, our goal here is to create something of value, but the only way to do that is if you have access to expertise in the field. So a good example of that is using FEC data for campaign contributions. You can go to the FEC site right now, download their data, and create some graphs, do some summations of the data to come up with totals, contributions to certain members of Congress, and it will more than likely be wrong. And that's because there is a huge set of arcane campaign finance rules that determine how you actually go about reporting these contributions and then totaling them up. And unless you have that expertise in the field, what you produce is not going to be of any value. Another example I want to show here real quick. I was recently working on a project with a coworker using HAMP data. That's the Home Affordable Mortgage Program. It was part of the TARP program to allow homeowners to refinance their mortgages at a much lower level. So we got started with this data, and we found a spreadsheet, actually a combination of spreadsheets that totaled 3.2 million records with 100 columns, and it was very difficult to make any sense of this. What we really wanted to do is find the records of the people that were actually accepted in the program and not rejected right away. So we opened up the user guide and found pages and pages of great information about how the program works, but not of actually how to use the data. They also distributed a data dictionary, which let us know how date formats were stored and the length of strings, but not how any of that data actually applied to the information in the user guide about how to use the program. So we finally got around to this query here to find the records of people that were actually accepted in the program, but it actually took a week of time from our journalists at Sunlight, basically playing with the data and reading documentation about the program to make guesses about this. And our calls from Treasury Department were not returned when we called them to ask them how to do this. So this is clearly an example of how not to work with the developer community. And if you try to run a challenge like this, it will sadly be a failure. So how do we do it the right way? First, we have to make the data understandable. The developers that are working in your challenge have to be able to communicate directly with the experts in the field or experts in the government. In addition to that, it would be great to provide step-by-step examples that illustrated the business rules on how to properly use the data to show how a developer can select certain columns, exclude certain records, and sum in a certain way to display various charts or graphics or make the data usable. Secondly, you need to make development easier. With that HAMP data, I had that wonderful data dictionary that had 100 records or 100 table entries about the format of data that I had to create my own SQL statements for, taking like an hour of time that I could have just been working with the data itself. So if you provide these definitions and you make it easier for developers to load the data, then they'll be able to actually get started much sooner. Similarly, you can provide client libraries if you have web services so that people can just start working with the data right away and not have to worry about the overhead of how they actually access the data. And finally, you need to create a community around the particular area that you're working in. If you have a community of people that are interested in the environment, then the place that you want them to be talking is at the EPA. If you can provide that forum, you also have a great way to get them in touch with the people that know about the data that they'll be working with. And then finally, you have to be proactive in reaching out to the developer communities. Ethan here stopped by our local Django district meetup that Sunlight hosts, and that's actually how I found out about this contest here. So you have to go and actually reach out to people. So kind of to repeat what Alex said, the only way you can judge the success of a challenge is by the self-sustaining applications and the community that creates around it. You can't claim a success if all you have left are 40 unmaintained applications after the project is over. If a developer senses that a challenge is just a one-off thing, then all that you'll get are one-off apps.
And everyone, just as a reminder, please go ahead and send your questions in while the speakers are talking, and we're going to take your questions at the end. I think we've already had a few, so go ahead and keep sending in your questions. We will be making the slides for this presentation available hopefully by tomorrow, as well as the recording and a transcript. And with that, we will turn it over to our next speaker.
So hi, my name is Michaela Hackner, and I work at Forum One Communications, and I was the project manager on the datamasher.org project. As Ethan mentioned in the beginning, we entered this in the Apps for America 2 contest and won first prize back in 2009. And basically the requirements for the contest back then were just to leverage some of the data sets that were on data.gov. There was not a certain number that we had to use. And so basically what we created is a Drupal-based data visualization tool that lets users take two data sets and mash them using an operator of their choice. So here you can see this is kind of the diagram of how it works. Pretty simple, and for any statisticians on the line, you can understand that what people come up with in the mashup may not be statistically valid, but it can provide a lot of fun. So here are some of the data sets we included. We went and combed through data.gov, and this was right after data.gov opened, so there were pretty random sets that were there, and not a lot of them that were consistent, so we couldn't really find a theme of data sets that we were going to use. We just picked what we could fit into our standard data model. And here is what some of the mashups look like. This is a heat map that shows where there's the highest and lowest numbers. So this is the dollars per point on the SAT. It mashes up two different data sets to come up with that. We also have the most reproductive states. So people had some fun with this, and there was also, Jeremy talked a little bit about community. There were some community features to this as well, where people were able to write comments and rate and rank the different mashups. So what were the biggest hurdles? Well, I think the key thing for us was finding the right data. When we decided to come up with an entry for the contest, we had a really hard time coming up with any data that we could actually use. And when we finally found one data set that worked, we ended up having to go to the actual source of the data somewhere else. And I was the person, I'm not a developer, but I was the person that went and started, putting all the data into our Excel spreadsheet to make it work. So, for example, we found some health data that came originally from Kaiser, and I ended up using that as a scent to go to Kaiser and pull down all the data sets there. So that was a really big challenge for us, and ultimately drove what we came up with as an application. I don't really feel like we came up with something that provided a ton of value, but there wasn't a lot of data sets that we were able to leverage. So that the data drove what we could come up with for the contest. There were just too many different formats when I drilled down into the data sets, and a lot of them didn't provide a lot of information about what I was looking at and the different acronyms people were using. It was really hard to interpret things. And then, of course, inconsistent data models, which is, a huge problem that probably nobody can exactly solve. But, even we were looking for state-by-state data, and we had a hard time finding state-by-state data that was formatted similarly, or that we didn't have to what was the word, munge in a lot of ways to get it to work. So the data drove the app solution rather than the app being driven by an actual community problem. And as we've been talking about here, the app has not been sustainable because there's not a ton of value. There's not demand to keep up with it because it's not providing a lot of value. And I think there's an incentive problem there in terms of keeping up with the app over time. And then finally, and I think Kurt, our CTO, is going to talk about this in a little bit, but since the government, when they created all this data, they didn't anticipate the public use of it, so it wasn't in a way that we were able to leverage it really quickly. And for all the apps contests, they're all really short, so you need to be able to get on the ground running and be able to leverage data right away. So that was pretty much what we struggled with. And now Kurt's going to talk about what would be awesome.
No pressure on at all. So on the heels of what Michaela just said, some of the biggest problems that we faced were around not being able to quickly understand the data. At the heart of what made creating something like Data Masher hard, regardless of how much value it brought, was the fact that getting at the data was difficult. So I have three quick things. Starting with the practical and then ending a bit with the esoteric. But first and foremost, it would be awesome if we were able to provide developers as government agencies with machine-readable ways to discover the data. There's a couple examples out there of ways that you could jumpstart this. Code-a-thon offers through their API, if you're using their tool, it automatically gives developers the ability to explore the data to avoid the HAMP problem. Maybe we could coin that, that Jeremy experienced, by traversing the data with the program, with the machine, because it tells you what's inside. Column headings, descriptions of column headings, explanations of diagrams. Google's relatively recently released dataset publishing language is another example of a framework that is helpful in these ways. But even starting with things as simple as Jeremy talked about, which is providing a document that explains these things, would be in the same. Of course, that wouldn't be that helpful for a machine, but that's in the same vein. The next big thing extends the concept of creating this community. Agencies need to, there's a lot of time and energy within the web and communications departments within agencies focusing on their target audiences, and treating developers as a priority audience is the best way, I think, to get their attention. And there's some good examples out there. Some are kind of quasi-governmental here, and others are government. I tried to pick some examples of organizations that have put developers right on their global nav as a concrete way of saying, you know, we care about you, and here's the things that you should have. And the types of things that go into there should be code, examples of what can be done, recipes. This gets to what Jeremy was talking about. How should I explore the data? And hopefully you're merging some APIs, and so the documentation will go there as well. And so lastly, I think that at what would be awesome is if, and I know that this is something that agencies are trying really hard to do within units and branches, but if we can, as an agency, anticipate public use of data, it will always make it easier downstream for the developer community to consume it. If we go into projects where we know data is a component, and we know one of the outputs is going to be an API, then we're going to be better off. It's very, very difficult to snap your fingers and write an API around a data set that was created years ago. But if the agency is set up to anticipate this as an output, it can make that process easier. And I love this quote. This is this is an old one now, but it's from Greg Ellen, who formerly led the Sunlight Labs group. And he's now, I don't know his exact title, but he's at FCC.
The Chief Data Officer.
Chief Data Officer. So, you know, someone heard him say this, I guess, and thought he was very smart, including me. And he said it's not just the API that's a big deal. It's the discipline an API imposes. To build one, an agency has to record and store data in a way that anticipates public use. So it makes it so that data sharing is not an afterthought, and as a result, you're able to baby step towards those elegant APIs, not have to move mountains after the data's already been collected.
Okay, so I think at that point we're actually through the presentation part of things, and we can get a little bit more into Q&A. Hopefully we'll be pulling in some questions to the online audience. You can certainly pose them online at Twitter to jump the queue. And we're going to get into the potential topics with these folks here, make this a bit more interesting. So first I'll just open this up to the three experts we have here. What's the most important thing that federal agencies can do to help developers? If we just heard two of them, right? Think downstream about when data is created, about it being made public, and make it more findable. What other ways can we offer than the ones you presented on? Head to you first, Jeremy.
Sure. I actually think Kirk covered a lot of the most important ones. The access to the data is big, and just knowing what the data is. I just go back to one of my other points of just making the experts in the field available for people to talk to, and you know, having that resource so developers can work with them.
Great.
Yeah, I've got one I think I could piggyback on there. And I think that this is maybe something that you should not do. And I think it's a path that people go down a lot, and that's letting the myth of a unified taxonomy or a unified data model stand in the way of releasing meaningful data. I think a lot of these projects start with it, oh, it's so hard for us to find data, so we have to normalize, we have to unify, and that is the hardest thing. Taking mountains of data and then normalizing it's like a non-starter. So I would say what you shouldn't do is start at the top and try to normalize it all. You should start at the bottom and make the stuff that you do have really usable.
The only thing I would add as a non-techie thing would just be recognize the value of the developers and the value that they're providing, and have conversations with them, open a dialogue with them, and recognize that they're doing something really important for you, and making sure that they understand that they just don't feel like it's just a kind of a one-off thing, but that's an ongoing conversation.
Great. And actually, I'm having trouble pulling that off of the screen. You want to look forward?
Maybe what we can do now actually is take some of the questions here and intersperse it with some of the speakers. So
great.
What we'll do is we'll try to, we have a question here from Evan Patton, I believe it says, hold on a second, are there slides available online? We mentioned actually we're going to put them online along with the transcript and this video file.
Okay.
Got a question from Jim Hendler,
yeah.
and it says,
EPA has invested in developing an ontology for a linked data version of the facility's database. Is that available for this competition?
By all means.
By all means.
We would welcome that. Yeah, we spent a lot of time, well, we're in the beginning of spending time working on semantic issues like that and organizing our information in ways that machines can read them, as some of the speakers have spoken about. So bravo. We're all for that.
Okay. So I think that's a yes, Mr. Hendler. Thank you for your piping in from RPI. For people who are not following him, he's been one of the advisors to the Data.gov project, and he's a good resource on linked open data. And speaking of which, do you see adoption of semantic web technologies among developers? This question is from Ryan McKeel. SemWeb is exciting for data mashers, but adoption has seemed slow so far. Thoughts on that? Jeremy?
I often take a very controversial approach that a lot of the semantic web, while beautiful ideologically, is very difficult to work with practically. There's a lot of overhead. And if we're talking about making things very simple for people to dive into, it's not often the best way to greet a developer that's eager to work with data.
Further?
Yeah, I mean, it holds the promise of being able to link all of these things, and I feel like it's still in that stage where it's similar to my other comment. It's a hard problem to solve. It might be the right solution, but it's not. Yeah, it's still. But for certain things, it works quite well, I guess. It's kind of context is everything.
Yeah, the take I have on that right now, I've had some unusual opportunities to speak to people leading in this area. Professor Hamler is one of them. Tim Berners-Lee is another. There's a lot of promise in linked open data. My sense in terms of what's happening with government is just getting clean, machine-readable data released in a way that can be used by developers right now, and they're getting to second base, so to speak, is a huge challenge right now. And it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some serious consideration of leapfrogging in terms of technology, but just simply getting the data out in a clean, accurate way so that people can make it into APIs, it seems like the need for the moment. So thank you very much for that question, Evan. And next up, we've got, I'm sorry, that was Ryan McKeel, and I see that Ryan and Professor Hamler are talking about it, which is good. So we've got Richard Robinson. What are opinions of Google Refine 2.0? Okay, people who aren't familiar, Google Refine is an online tool for cleaning up data. Do you use it?
I have not used it personally. I played with it a bit when MetaWeb, before they were bought by Google, and it was a fantastic tool. And I know lots of people that do use it, but I've never used it personally. It seems to be a great way to clean up simple data sets.
Okay. Any more comments? I'd say I see Google Refine being used by data journalists and newsrooms quite a bit now. There's a lot of interest in the tool. So great. Moving on to Byron Bowles. I think I got that right. Why not use XML?
I I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with XML. For nested data, it's a decent alternative. There's extra effort that it takes to parse XML rather than a format like JSON or a structured tabular format like CSV. So there's nothing inherently wrong with XML. It's just usually a bit easier for a developer to get started with CSV or JSON.
And one of the examples that's held up in terms of doing it right, I've seen at least, is the Federal Register's relaunch, and that does release data in XML last time I checked. That, unfortunately, for a lot of government is an aspirational goal still, in terms of releasing open data in a structured way.
Actually, it partially depends on the technology you're using as well. A lot of strongly typed languages like Java and C# are able to auto-generate tools to read the XML for you. So those actually work out quite well for those types of languages. But if you're dealing more in the Ruby, Python, PHP world, typically JSON or CSV is a much easier data format to read.
Okay, questions are still coming in. Keep asking them. We'll answer as many of them as we can during this time. We're going to actually skip down to Brand, since Byron just got one in. We'll come back to his. Topic, make the data and data dictionaries available. Well, I think that's a pretty solid topic. So everyone's nodding around the table here, Brand. So we got that one in, and we agree. Looks like I'm going to go back to Jim Hendler here. A link to the EPA ontology would be useful. I think that's a comment for you all.
Right. I don't know if it's available right now. I believe it is. We'll look into it.
Okay. And skipping all the way to the end here, and we'll keep going back. From Evan Patton. One of the complaints has been that semantic web is too hard, but you want to develop APIs to access data. How many APIs do you have to make before the learning curve for all the APIs overcomes the effort one would need to just use semantic web? That's what we'll be. Fellas? Want to speak to that? No? Okay.
Well, I'll just say that one of the promises of the semantic web is a one ontology to rule them all. But that is, as someone else here said, more of what we're trying to reach in the future rather than what's available right now. And right now, you will more than likely find different people using different ontologies to represent the same things. And at that point, it is no easier than just having different APIs without any semantic properties on them at all.
Okay. And we've got Professor Hendler saying that link to open data is not too hard, and he links to one of O'Reilly's books. So what can I say? Apparently you can go and learn how to do that better. And I should have that at my fingertips. Okay, circling back up to Byron here. Are there specific mobile platform requirements for the apps? iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Windows Mobile, J2Me, etc.
So for EPA's EPA. For the environment challenge, we are not making any requirements about platforms. Any and all platforms are submittable. We're trying to keep it easy for you. That's the point. And if you know that an audience, a user group needs a certain kind of platform, that's the audience. That's the platform you should be using.
Okay, so that sounds like there's plenty of flexibility left on that count. And along topic, we've got a semantic web link from Brand on the environment challenge. So it's a suggestion, semantic information.
Looks like Brand has a thing for a link to the semantic community.
.info.
Okay. Start from.
Thank you, Brand. We're looking at that. Okay. Next up from PJ Gray. We're getting to the end of our queue of questions, so please keep them coming in. What limits are there on developing commercial apps that also participate in these contests? For the EPA.
What are the limits on developing commercial apps that are participating? Oh, all right. So here's the deal. For our contest, the developers get to keep the intellectual property, except for one slice of it, and that is they have to make a version of their app available for free for a year. All right, that doesn't preclude developers from making versions of the app that they can charge for, or after a year's time having the kind of open free use expire. So there are ways we want to cultivate a situation where people can make money off these apps. When we recognize that not every app's going to make money, but if you can make some, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I would say certainly if we're looking across different sectors, healthcare and transportation open data can and are being used in commercial applications. Definitely for-profit uses there, and at least under the current licenses that the data is being released here, and certainly in other countries, that is perfectly fine. You can see that as to the GPS data and weather data as well. If there's a commercial incentive to build a good application, there's a much better chance of it, frankly, sticking around a lot of the time. And that's certainly part of the conversation. And it sounds like EPA is saying that usage is fine. So if you can make an application that you sell for $1 or $2 that easily tells, say, contractors where the local brownfields are, or information about toxics or any other kind of mashup, that should be something we think about. The larger context of what I think people here are saying is that if you can solve a problem for people that actually makes something useful, and then find data or ask for the release of data that helps with that, there's a much better chance that the application is going to become sustainable. Do we have more questions coming in? Great.
Yeah, I see one just to keep in that same vein here. I see a question from Byron Bowles, it looks like. Can the free apps be ad-supported? The answer right now is I don't know. I'll have to think about that one and check with our general counsel, but we'll get back to you on that and post the answer.
Yeah, I mean, currently applications on .gov websites, advertising is not allowed there. If you have a private application, it's hard to see where there would be a problem with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor Hendler asks another question. Moving away from the semantic web, for EPA data like ECHO, which are not yet on data.gov, is there a way to request them for the competition?
Yes. Actually, just yesterday we had one of our many data discovery webinars about EPA's data, and the one yesterday was about ECHO, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it deals with environmental enforcement information. Basically, who has enforcement actions against them, for what reason, what are the penalties that have been assessed, where they're located, and what are the natures of their problems there. The data is available. Let's see. Actually, I think definitely by tomorrow we will have the transcript up for that webinar, so you can actually see that in writing, or you can listen to the webinar. And I'm not going to try to remember the URL to ECHO, the ECHO database, but there are ways for you to download the data in bulk, and also to use basically a web form and put in various search facets and get a subset of data as a return as well.
Okay. And another question from Brand Neiman here. If you are fostering linked open data, why are so few of the 30 data sets in RDF?
Fostering open data. Well, I guess I'd say to that we're fostering open data slowly, and I'm glad we have some in RDF. We're just looking at other forms. What we're trying to do still is get to kind of first base here. All right, and so we've got a decent set of information that's in CSV format, which is pretty consumable by programmers, and a few that are in RDF. And we'll just keep making more as funds allow and as experimenting allows.
Great. And we've got a comment here online. It would be useful to have a wiki-like link page where people can contribute useful links for Green App developers. We're seeing a lot of those come up here in the back channel. I know there'll be slides archived from this. And is there going to be any kind of wiki or online resource like that?
Not a wiki, but an online discussion forum.
Okay.
So we actually, as part of this challenge, having heard from developers that they want to understand what our data are, what the data services are, and so on, we have a website you can start from, epa.gov/developer.
There's the blog link right here.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you look on screen, you can see it. There's the blog link where you can see a discussion forum. but on the epa.gov/developer, or it might be developers, I think it's developer, you can see our data, services, ideas for apps, which, by the way, we have 90 ideas for apps that have been submitted through this blog. And what we've done for those is also find the associated EPA data for each of those ideas as far as we've gone. But there's a place for people to add existing apps and any ideas.
That's on the Apps for the Environment link?
Yeah.
That's not versus the blog.epa.gov link. Which one can people actually add to on their own?
So they can go to the blog.epa.gov/data.
Okay.
That's the discussion forum.
So
It has several parts.
Great.
James shared a tweet also where he says that there's, for data.gov data, that they've already, in the project that I guess he's working on, has about 1,000 of the data.gov data sets available in RDF today, which is good news.
Great. And for people who are also tuned in, Brand Neiman's been sharing links to something called semanticcommunity.info, which may be of interest to people tuned in here as well. Okay. We've got, looks like, another question, and I can't see who it's from, but I'll start reading. I've created an online wiki resource for all of this. See the URL I just sent. Brand URL I just sent to make this contest easier for me and others to enter. I think that was the link to semanticcommunity.info. So thank you for that, Brand. Okay. That brings us to the end of the questions submitted so far. I think we have another 15 minutes to go on this. Is that correct?
We actually scheduled this for 45 minutes.
45 minutes.
So people could, if they were going to hear it later.
Okay.
You know, actually, we're welcome, though, I think, to go for another few minutes if the speakers can deal with that.
Well, then.
Do you want to mention the Code-a-thon?
Yeah, you know what we'll do? What we can do is just close here and then have kind of extra questions, just like a regular meeting that has an official closing time and if people mill around afterwards. That's all right? So I'll do a few closing remarks here. And then we'll go ahead. So as you can see on the slide up there, we're going to post this webinar on the Apps for the Environment website pretty prominently. And if people want to continue the conversation, you can do so at that discussion forum, which is WordPress blog. And if you're a developer who's listening, submit your apps. But this conversation isn't just about developers. It's actually about what do developers need. So even if you're not a developer, please try to add to this conversation.
Let's leave this up at the end.
Yeah. So actually we have an announcement that we're going to have an Apps for the Environment Code-a-thon. It's actually going to be hosted by American University, sponsored by them and everything, September 3rd from 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Time. And all developers are welcome, students, pros, retired, all developers. And you'll be able to see the details. Within half an hour, we'll have our blog post up on the blog.epa.gov/data. And you'll get some of the details. And look for this. It should be very exciting. American University is being very gracious as host and inviting other schools and really taking it upon themselves to make this a success. So that's a chance to give people to actually make apps that could be entered into this contest. So what I'm going to do now is just thank our speakers, and we'll close kind of formally, and then we will still keep the lines open for another 5 or 10 minutes as they have time available. So thank you very much to Alex Howard of O'Reilly Media, Jeremy Carbach of Sunlight Foundation, Michaela Hackner and Kurt Volker of Forum 1, and here's some more contact information.
We do have a couple more questions coming in.
Great. Okay. How are the mobile apps distributed? This is from Byron Bowles. Does EPA have the capability to distribute them directly, or are you relying on app stores, etc.?
Good question. Right now we're using challenge.gov as the kind of challenge platform. So if you submit an app, it goes there. We actually do some screening of it to see if it meets the requirements, like does it use EPA data, and also to see if it passes any security, some security screens we do to make sure that it's not malicious, doesn't have malicious capabilities, and then we post it up on the challenge.gov website. Most people make their apps available through a URL. So, and that's where people could download the apps from. Other requirements for submitting things are that people have to provide a video that shows the app in use, and they have to provide some description of the EPA data they're using, and if necessary, any installation information. But that it will be available through the challenge.gov website and potentially also on EPA's website. We're trying to figure out how to give credit to all the people who are working on this.
And, I mean, in general, and I can speak to across the board, when these applications roll out, they end up being distributed through whatever platform they're on. Now that creates some unique challenges around, say, the Apple Store, where they have to be approved. But if you develop on an Android, it's usually much less of a barrier. BlackBerry has their own process. Windows 7 is actually now an option for people as well. That'll become more of a platform as the Nokia partnership comes online. But in general, when those applications get developed, then that's going to be something you negotiate specifically with the app stores in question, which is one reason some developers are actually choosing to explore things like HTML5 apps, which are, which are not native and don't have to go through any approval process.
And I want to add one more thing. There's a lot of talk about different kinds of app stores. From that EPA.gov/developer website, there's a listing of existing apps that use EPA data that are mobile apps. There are a few that EPA has made themselves, and we're trying to find where the other ones are. So right now we're trying to position ourselves as a place to go to find apps, whether we've made them or others have made them. Let's see if there are any other questions or not.
Okay. Thanks, Brian, for all the questions. What comes next after the app contest? Another one or an even bigger challenge?
That's such an easy question. I don't know if I have to answer it, but no, we haven't really figured that out yet. Just this discussion here is important to have, and we want to have your feedback about this. But I don't think we're just going to be a challenge factory. What we're trying to do is find ways to address some of the problems that, I don't know if anyone said money out loud here in this whole webinar, but that's a key thing. How do you make these apps sustainable so you don't just have prototypes that wither, right? We've seen too many of those, and it's not a good thing. So we're trying to find ways for developers to get paid for their work, and I don't have any details right now. We're just still discussing whether that would be, there are options. For instance, feds could procure these. Federal agencies could. They would have to set that up.
That was the natural question I was going to ask.
Right.
So EPA's got a new CIO. I just checked. It's Malcolm Jackson.
That's right.
The question that I would really want to ask is if people make things that actually solve a problem for the EPA or solve a problem for citizens, would the EPA then be able to acquire them or pay developers to sustain them for them?
Yeah, well, we're not running this challenge to see who's going to give us an app that we could buy. But that said, if there's an app that makes sense, that's something that EPA or state departments of environmental protection could use, maybe we would look into ways for us to use that. So, but we can't promise that right now, and we have no idea what kinds of submissions we'll get.
Okay.
But there are other funding mechanisms as well. I mean, it could be through foundations or through NGOs who have foundation money, or somehow what we're really talking about is matching customers and developers here. And is there a way for customer groups to fund developer teams to make apps that work for them? So here's an example of an app that I've heard a need for, and I don't know how to deal with it. So when communities go to get water treatment grants from EPA, they have to get data from many agencies, state, local, and federal agencies. And they don't have a way to get all the data for their single location. They have to go to U.S. Geologic Survey, EPA, their local historic society, all kinds of things. So someone wrote to me, if you could find an app that would help all of us communities just figure that out, you'd be a god. Well, that's an opportunity for a developer right there. And I don't know how that could be funded, but maybe a lot of communities could pay for an app that costs $100 or something. I don't really know how the system could work. So to sum it up, there are lots of ways for this to work, and we haven't figured them out. And I think that's why we're we're talking about this today.
Great. Well, I think that got apologies for typos. No worries, Byron. Thank you for asking all the questions. No big whoop. And again, thank you, Brad Niemner, for bringing up your semantic web community. That's a great resource if people want to check it out. It's semanticcommunity.info. And again, there's a great back channel at #GreenApps on Twitter. Tons of links being shared there, which you can find even before they get added to the EPA's blog, assuming people have gone off to find that. Again, that's, what's it? EPA.blog.info.
Actually, it's blog.epa.gov/data.
Great. And if you're interested in apps for the environment, again, this challenge is going to be going on for a little while. If you have feedback on the data, there's data problems, if it's not complete, make sure everyone knows about it. Part of the idea of this is to figure out some of the issues with it, and if you run into problems developing on it, then that's something that they need to know about. Some of the thinking in this is that it isn't just about the applications, it's about the process, and they need to know what's wrong with their data if they're going to continue doing this. So thank you for tuning in, and with that I will turn and let people say their final pieces about challenges, open data, open government, etc. Starting down to my far right.
I just want to thank everybody for having us here today. This has been a really great conversation, and speaking again as somebody who was a project manager on an app development project, I think that things are going to get a lot easier, but I think we have a long road to go. And I think that, working through some of these other ways of accessing data through the APIs and whatnot, as well as just cataloging the data better and providing information around that so people can find the kind of data sets they want, then they're going to have a lot more meaningful apps out of the end of it. And then hopefully those will be more sustainable because they'll provide value and there'll be a demand for them.
I just wanted to give a high five to the EPA for the great work they're doing on this contest here. I think a lot of the things that we talked about what agencies should do, the EPA is doing right now. So, good job.
Great.
Yeah, another thank you for having us today. It was a great conversation, and it feels like we're at the point where, like, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and they're like the garden's starting to grow, kind of. So, we'll see how it all ends up, but it'll be an interesting place for sure, and a more data-rich one.
Right. That's a good green pun.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Well, again, thank you for everyone for tuning in, for all of your great questions, and given the wonder of the Internet, this conversation can continue online, so keep that Green Apps hashtag going. Please go and visit the EPA's blog. Please go visit the open data sets. Check out data.gov, and certainly check out Sunlight Labs and Forum 1 because they're working on these issues and have a lot to share on those counts. So thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.